Okay, so I just finished watching the um, Western Conference Finals game two for the Spurs against OKC, and it just reminded me of the importance of staying consistent. And I just wanted to talk about that briefly today. So basically, game one of the Western Conference Finals, the Spurs beat OKC, and OKC was coming off of a week break from having to play as they earned that time off, and so game one they were it took them a while to like warm up. It took them a little while. There's SGA. He wasn't really hitting his shots like he normally does, at least in the beginning of the game, which allowed the Spurs to kind of break away for the majority of the game. Um, Pretty much two players were just like keeping OKC alive, Caruso and J Dubs. But ultimately, the Spurs ended up winning that game. And OKC was at home. But today, game two, OKC, course corrected. They stayed consistent to their gameplay and ended up winning game two tonight. The final score was 122-13. Now, just kind of a recap of how I, viewed the game. The game was close the entire time. Like, no team really particularly, like, they both were dominant. I didn't want to say that neither one of them were dominant because they both were like equally dominant throughout the game. Like, it was pretty much even both offensively and defensively, in my opinion. Um, and this is coming from a completely casual fan point of view. Okay, so no deep analysis here, just literally from what I could see on the screen. Okay, so both teams were hustling, like they were hustling um, the whole entire game. And I believe maybe the largest margin, the largest point gap was maybe like 13, 14, maybe 15 points, um, which OKC, had the lead for that amount. But just as soon as OKC would kind of widen that gap, the Spurs were right behind them and they were closing it. So it was pretty, pretty even for the majority of the game, despite the point difference. Like the way that the players were playing was pretty even, in my opinion. So, and that brings me to, my first point about just, even though it seems like OKC couldn't really break away far enough, like to really get comfortable, right? Which is to be expected because you got the number one and number two teams. So, you know what I mean? It should be a competition. Like it shouldn't be as easy, right, to win against that team. But ultimately, you know, even though um, neither team could seem to really pull away from the other, they were both, working really hard to stay in the game despite not really knowing what the outcome of the game, because really that game could have went either way. Because let me just take a look. They basically, so they both scored. They both, on the first quarter, they were 31 and 31 points even, right? And OKC outscored the Spurs the second quarter. The Spurs outscored OKC the third quarter. And then OKC only outscored the Spurs by 1 point. And I mean, you know, um, the largest lead was during the second quarter, which, it's not lead, but the most points scored, against the other team was the second quarter where OKC scored 31 to the Spurs 20. So outside of that second quarter, which also I believe the Spurs lost one of their key players to an injury. Oh, yeah, J-Dub, which is crazy because sidebar, I just did a video about game one about, you know, Jalen Williams being given extra time to rest to recover from a hamstring injury. But I talked about the importance of giving yourself extra time to recover from burnout specifically. But what's so crazy is tonight in game two, well, backtrack a little bit, game one, J Dubs was balling. Like him and Caruso was keeping that team alive, fresh off coming back from an injury. But yet, fast forward to today's game, lo and behold, he gets pulled out of the game by the second quarter due to that same hamstring giving him issues. And it just made me think about that. See, maybe he needed a little bit more time to rest, you know what I mean? Which was one of the points that I made in my previous video, and I'll link to it at the end of this one so you guys can check it out. But that was my sidebar. But getting back to the points each quarter, like it was pretty even the majority of the game. So the game could really have gone either way. Neither team, you couldn't sleep on that other team. But ultimately, they kept giving it their all, which I was to be expected because they went into double overtime in game one. So I was hoping they wouldn't do that again this game, and they didn't because OKC was able to continue to consistently maintain a lead throughout the game, no matter, how small or big or small it was, which it wasn't too wide. Like the game didn't run away from either team. So, which brings me to, my next point. Even though it was a close game, when we're thinking about that, and like say you're working on something, in my case starting a new YouTube channel, just getting comfortable, getting used to posting daily to build a certain discipline, and just feeling like I'm definitely working towards something that I'm hoping will be helpful for other people, but also allow me to still express myself creatively, and just feeling close to getting a solid footing and continuing to grow my channel. Just like making it analogous to the game, which, you know what I mean, even though you're not really seeing results right now, does that mean do you still keep going even though you don't see the results, right? Or, if it's just too close, do you begin to question, like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Because you're putting in all of this work, but you can't see, like, you don't really feel like you're making progress. You don't feel like you're, getting ahead enough to, be comfortable, right? So it just kind of made me think about that a little bit, with the game, like, you know what I mean? It could have gone either way, but they didn't stop. Like they kept going. Like some games I watch where you can kind of tell by the fourth quarter, you can like tell like some of the teams, like they're just exhausted. They stop playing, as hard, you know what I mean? But that's not the case for this game, and it just reminded me of about just continuing to put in the work, because ultimately, even though the game is close now, you never know how that hard work will pay off, right? So I hope I was able to drive that point home. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about um, you know, just, well, yeah, just I kind of combined my 2 points in the last point, but what I really was trying to emphasize, um, being tempted to stop, when the results aren't really showing. And that was actually the point that I was trying to make. The last point that I was trying to make is just just being, showing up every day and putting in the effort, which I think I did touch on that. And even though it doesn't seem to, you can't really see the outcome just yet, but just continuously showing up and putting in the work, is the most important thing. And it's usually a point when you, especially when you don't you don't feel like you're making any progress, you might be tempted to, take your foot off the gas or even just stop altogether. But those are the moments in which you want to continue to push through, right? And then I kind of went directly into my final point, which is just doing the work when you don't seem to be giving, pulling away and growing at a rate in which, you think you should be going, right? And just staying consistent, stay showing up, and putting in the work, so that eventually, hopefully it ends up, paying off in the long run as far as, what I mean, achieving the goal that you set for yourself, right? So it just kind of made me think of a little bit about that, just staying consistent, because in the beginning of the game, they were talking about OKC's coach talking about, despite their loss in the first game, they didn't have no, plans. They stick to their game plan. They keep consistent with what they do. They, you know what I mean? They don't harp on the emotional side of a loss. They follow their, whatever their protocol is, and apply what they learned to the next game and go out there and continue to be consistently better, right? So that initial, quote that they gave at the beginning of the game, it seems like at the beginning of the games, they say things that really kind of stand out before the game itself even happens. And that just happened to spark the thought about staying consistent, and it ultimately motivated me to hear it, because today was a rough day for me, honestly. I've been posting daily, and today was kind of one of those days where I was just like exhausted. But after, watching that game and ultimately seeing OKC come out on top, I was just like, yeah, no, this is why, staying consistent is most important. So I just wanted to, share that little thought, little takeaway, from tonight's game. And I look forward to watching the rest of the series. I mean, both the Eastern and Western conferences, the games have been bananas. Um, and this is, I haven't consistently, watched the playoffs in the NBA in quite some time. So these games are definitely, exciting. And I look forward to seeing what happens with both Eastern and Western conferences and seeing who ends up going on to the championship. But in any event, thank you so much for hanging out with me and watching my video. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.